Over the past month, we've been hearing the theme for the messages has been missions and evangelism. And a part of that series I took up is history makers and lessons from the modern day evangelists and missionaries and holistic missions. That is what the theme or my message encompasses today. And the title for what I've titled the message for today is God's Loving Heart. Okay? And before we begin, I would like to share a true incident that took place in Germany in a monastery where Christian brothers were trained to be brothers so that they could be useful in various ministries in the Roman Catholic Church. So there was this one brother who was being trained. He was a novice, and he was in preparation, and they were given several duties. But he was very scared of preaching or taking the service, so he was petrified and he wanted a way out from it. So he thought of talking straight to his senior monk and asking him to relieve him of this duty. So he walked up to his senior prior or the monk and he said, "Sir, please, I have a request." He says, "Yes." And he says, "The request is that I am willing to do anything in the monastery. I'm willing to scrub the silverware. I'm willing to scrub the floors. I'm willing to sweep. I'm willing to wash. I'm willing to do anything. But please relieve me of the duty of preaching in the chapel." So the prior was a little surprised that he is being trained and he's come up with a strange request. So he looked at him, and in his mind he says, well, this brother needs just that. He needs to be trained. So he needs to learn how to preach. So he told him, he says, okay, he put him on the spot and he said, well, dear brother, well, it will be your turn to preach tomorrow morning. And this novice was left petrified. He didn't know what to do. So he went back to his room the whole night. He was restless. The morning comes, and here he's up on the chapel, ready to preach. And he stands there. He's sweating. He's petrified. He's trembling. He's shivering, not knowing what to say. And he meets the eyes of all his peers who are sitting there, and he looks straight at them and he says, brothers, do you know what I'm going to preach? And everyone's dumbfounded, and they shook their heads. No. And he says, well, neither do I. Let's all stand and take the benediction and go. And out they walk. So the prior, the monk, the head monk was very angry, and he was like, what is this novice up to? What is this brother up to? You know, he's been given an opportunity to preach and he's not willing to do that. So he caught him and he said, well, I will give you one more chance. Tomorrow you will preach again. He did not know what to do. The whole night was restless. Next morning, he lands up in chapel again. He's standing there in the front and he looks at all his peers and he says, well, do you know what I'm going to preach? And they looked at him and they said, yes. He says, then I don't need to say anything since you know what I'm going to say. Let's stand, receive the benediction and go. Oh, the prior, the head monk was furious. He said, what is this tomfoolery you're about? You're being trained and you're not willing to take up your responsibility. And he caught him and he says, I'm giving you one final chance. Tomorrow you have to preach in church, in the chapel. So the next morning, he's there again. He doesn't know what to do. He's out of breath. He has nothing prepared. He stands there and he looks at his peers and he says, well, dear brothers, do you know what I'm going to preach? And now they're all confused. They're looking at each other and some nod their heads. Some say no. And then he looks at them and says, well, some of you know what I'm going to say and the others don't. Well, the ones who do know what I'm going to say, please tell the ones who don't know. So let's all receive the benediction and leave. Well, I'm not going to ask you to stand and leave because I have something prepared and I am going to share what God has laid on my heart. So please don't receive the benediction right now. We still have a long way to go. So the message is titled God's Loving Heart. And the verse that I've taken is Matthew 9:35 to 38. So if we have our Bibles, it's up on the screen too. We can read this together. Matthew 9:35 to 38. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Please note the last verse, 38. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest field. His harvest. We are reflecting on God's heart or God's loving heart. And if we look at this verse, what we see is that God has a missional heart, or God has a heart which reaches out to people, a loving heart, where he wants a relationship. He wants everyone who does not know him to come back to him and to know him personally. And as we explore missions and the message of God, we cannot help but marvel at how missional or how focused our God is and how he has been working through history, through our own Indian history, and bringing our great nation under his great plan, drawing people unto himself. And in this journey today, when we reflect on God's heart, we are going to look at the 5 extraordinary lives who were called into this harvest field. Because it says here, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. There are 5 laborers who agreed to be a part of that great harvest. And we're going to just look at 5. There are many more. And look at their lives and see how God used them to transform lives, nations, communities, and people, and bring in a transformation. So the first person that we're going to look at is William Carey. We must have heard about him. And I forgot to say this in the Hindi worship, but definitely all of you, do you all like watching movies? Yes. How many like watching movies? I would encourage each one of you. There are movies on each of these lives that I will be sharing today and others too. Please, there are animated versions for children. William Carey's movie is called Candle in the Dark. Please do watch it and be inspired by their lives. See how God used them and how they laid the foundation for where we are today. So the first person is William Carey, who did a dual job. He was a Baptist pastor as well as a cobbler. And he turned from a cobbler to a missionary. He was a pioneer English missionary who came to India in 1793. And he made his living by repairing shoes. And Carey was very, very fascinated with globes and maps. And all around his room, he had globes and maps kept everywhere. And a reading of A Voyage Round the World by James Cook challenged and changed him. Because what James Cook wrote in his book was that there were various islands all around the world, but the strange fact was that none of these islands knew about Christ. This book awakened William Carey's conviction that Christians had an obligation to go and teach and preach the gospel to those who had never heard it. So what did he do? When he went up to his denominational leaders and he said, "Send me out as a missionary," and they disagreed. He did not stop there. He got a group of his friends and he says, "Here, let's form a group and we will send out missionaries." And they agreed, and we will support these. And he became the first missionary recruit of that group. And he came to India. Carey left native England. He came to India in response to Jesus' Great Commission. He wanted India to come to Christ. Thus, he plunged into open-air evangelism, Bible translation projects for several of the Indian languages. 7 years would pass before he could see the first person coming to God. When the breakthrough finally came, Carey added discipleship, church planting to his evangelistic efforts. Carey's focus was never limited to just trying to save souls. He wanted the people of India to be all that God had created them to be. So during his 4 decades in India, Carey fiercely battled evils like the caste system, the female infanticide, and also sati. He was the pioneer who fought against sati, and along with Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Our history records and gives the credit to Raja Ram Mohan Roy, but he was the pioneer who stood up against sati and fought for the cases of women. Carey founded the Serampur College, the first non-denominational Christian college in India, as well as started primary and secondary schools. His holistic approach also drove him to spend time and energy on things like horticulture, agriculture, and economic development. Carey certainly lived out the motto that he expressed very early on, even before he came to India. That's up on the screen. Expect great things from God and attempt great things for him. He attempted great things for God fearlessly. Now, we are just looking at what he did, but the challenges, his own personal challenges when he came to India. His wife went mad, and he had to take care of her. She died several years later. He lost his children, but his sacrifice, his focus did not change. He continued to do what God had called him to do. People often call Carey the father of the modern missionary movement. He's called the father of modern missions. And rightly so, because Carey was the pace setter for the holistic way missionary work is done even today. And his life is a true testament to that. That's the first story. The first laborer who agreed and said, yes, Lord, I am ready for the harvest. I'm willing to partner in cutting the harvest that is ready. William Carey, from a cobbler to a missionary. The second life that we see is, the second one that we see is Amy Carmichael. Have you heard about her? Amy Carmichael. She was an Irish girl. And her famous quote is, you can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. She was an Irish lady and from a very wealthy Irish family. Her father ran a mill and they were doing pretty well. But at the age of 18, she lost her father. And the family business ran down. It completely closed down, and they were now very poor, and they didn't have much. But Amy Carmichael continued to serve the poor. She continued to help the people in the slums, and then she had to leave Ireland, and she moved to England. And she continued to work in the slums, helping the poor, helping the people, sharing about Christ. But then what happened? She fell ill, and she was staying with her friends, the Wilsons. And there she met Hudson Taylor, who was a famous missionary to China. When she heard his story, she was burdened that she too wanted to be a missionary. And she decided to give her life for missions. And she set out. And she asked her church, which she was rejected at first, but then in 1894, Amy left as a missionary to India. She came to South India and settled in Tamil Nadu, learning the difficult Tamil language. And not only did she just settle there and learn the language, she became a part and parcel of the people here in India. She adopted the dress, the sari that people wore. She even used coffee to dye her hair black so that she could look like us. She slept on a mat, which the others in the community refused to do, and they did not like it. They even opposed her. But she says, no, I have come to the people. God has called me to these people. And she was fluent in Tamil. And what changed her life completely was an encounter with a 7-year-old girl called Preena. This girl had escaped from the temple, and she had come for shelter too. She had found shelter in front of Amy Carmichael's door. She had escaped thrice, and this was the third time she had come. Her hands were burned because they were branded. And if you all know, South India is very, it was famous for, though it has stopped now, for the Devdasi Pratha, or the temple prostitution. Parents would sell their young girls in hope of receiving blessings from the gods and goddesses, and they would sell these young girls to the temple so that they would become temple prostitutes, and they were treated and mistreated very badly. Amy Carmichael sheltered Prina, and then she realized that God had called her, that she could not keep quiet about this. She would take action, and she set up the Donavar Fellowship, where she rescued hundreds, thousands of girls from temple prostitution. And not only rescued them, but she trained them vocationally, gave them an education, gave them hope, shared the love of God. Let them know that there is a God who loves them. There is a purpose in their lives, that their lives matter. That is what Amy Carmichael did. But in 1931, Amy Carmichael fell, and she was completely bedridden. But that did not stop her. From her bedridden home in her room, for 20 years, she managed the rescue home. She wrote books about her missionary work in India. Even though she was hurt, she continued to serve the Lord, sharing Jesus with others. In 1951, Amy died here in India. And a fountain is built in Donavar, which is built over her grave, and engraved on that fountain is called Amma. That is what she was lovingly called. And the Donavar Fellowship stands today as a testament to what she did, rescuing, harvesting what God had planted in her heart. That is Amy Carmichael. You can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. She gave all. We look at the third life, the third person, Pandita Ramabai, a champion for women's rights. And what she says is, a life totally committed to God has nothing to fear, nothing to lose, and nothing to regret. The stamp was issued in 1989 in honor of Pandita Ramabai and the causes that she championed. She was born in 1858 in a high Brahminical society, in a very high Brahmin family. Her father was a Sanskrit scholar. And in those days where women were not educated, her father educated her. She became a Sanskrit scholar, not only Sanskrit, but she also learned Greek, Hebrew, and other languages. She was proficient. And she championed the cause for women, education for women. Pandita Ramabai relentlessly advocated for women's education. She believed that education was the key to empowering women and freeing them from the oppressive traditions that kept them subjugated. To further her goal, she established many institutions for women's welfare and traveled across India, giving lectures on women's rights. During these travels, she studied the Bible, where she embraced Christ as her Lord. And she set up the Arya Mahila Samaj in 1882, then the Shraddha Sadan in 1889. And then she even championed the cause for medical education for women in the Hunters Commission before the English Education Commission. And because of her contribution and her stress, this led to the establishment of Lady Dufferin College, the first institution for Indian women to get medical education. That was the impact she had. Her work extended beyond education to addressing issues such as child marriage, widowhood, and the rigid caste system. Ramabai established the Mukti Mission, which is very close to Pune and Kedgaon, in 1889, which provided shelter and care for widows and orphans and those suffering from social ostracism, and also empowered these women through vocational training, helping them to rebuild their lives. We have visited Kedgaon many times, and we have seen the impact that institution has had on so many lives. My own aunt, my uncle's wife, she was from Mukti Mission. And what an impactful life, how lives have been transformed. Her courage and compassion exemplifies the loving heart, the missional heart of God, reminding us that our faith calls us to action on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves, the voiceless, the unheard. Today, her legacy inspires many to continue to fight for justice and equality. Another laborer who agreed, who said, "Yes, Lord, I am willing. The harvest is ready." She did not stay behind, but she was proactive and fought for the women and everyone, because she herself at that time, just 2 years into her marriage, she lost her husband. And when she was living, that time widows were ostracized. They were looked down upon. She fought for them. She broke all social norms. She stood up for women's education. And she brought a transformative power because Christ had transformed her. She did not keep it limited to herself. That is Pandita Ramabai, a champion for women's rights. A life totally committed to God, has nothing to fear, nothing to lose, and nothing to regret. That is Pandita Ramabai. We go on to look at the fourth champion, Narayan Vaman Tilak, Reverend Narayan Vaman Tilak, the advocate for education, very similar to Pandita Ramabai. And he says, "I never thought of the Bible or of Christ for the reason that the Bible is so simple a book." He was a philosopher, a poet, and a writer. And how did he come to know the Lord? He was also from a very high caste Hindu family. The life of Reverend Vaman Tilak, who is a renowned Marathi poet and a hymn writer, is of remarkable spiritual transformation. And in 1891, Tilak's path crossed with a Christian missionary on a train. This missionary's teachings resonated with Tilak's own spiritual inspirations, and he delved into the Christian scriptures, particularly the Bible. Tilak's conversion sparked a fierce backlash from his family and community. He was ostracized by his relatives, abandoned by his friends, and faced immense pressure to renounce his newfound faith. Despite the challenges and personal sacrifices, Tilak was steadfast in his convictions. When Narayan Tilak decided to convert to Christianity, his wife Lakshmi Bai initially did not join him in embracing his new faith. She had reservations and concerns about the potential consequences of such a decision, including the potential social and the familial backlash that they might face. For a period of over 4 years, both husband and wife were separated because of different religious beliefs. But after 4 years, in 1900, Lakshmi Bai got baptized along with her son. Tilak's literary prowess played a significant role in his ministry. He became a prolific hymn writer, composing over 254 hymns that are still a part of the Upasana Sangeet, where 700 hymns are there in the Marathi hymnal. His hymns, his bhajans, infused with deep spiritual insights and poetic expressions, continue to inspire and uplift believers. Narayan Vaman Tilak passed away on May 9, 1919, leaving behind a remarkable legacy of faith, courage, and literary excellence. Tilak's legacy reminds us that the mission is holistic. It is not just winning souls. It involves not only preaching the gospel, but also meeting the practical needs. His commitment to education continues to inspire us towards empowerment and transformation that we can bring about even today. Right? That is Reverend Narayan Vaman Tilak. We go on to the last person that I have on the list is Sadhu Sundar Singh. He's called the mystic evangelist. I don't know how many of you have heard it, but he is very much of our soil, our own Punjab soil. And Sadhu Sundar Singh was born on September 3rd, 1889, in a village in Rampur. It's just an hour away from here, very close by, near Ludhiana in Punjab. He grew up in a faithful Sikh family and was deeply rooted in his religious traditions. Singh's mother had taken him to a Hindu priest and called the sadhu to spiritually train Sadhu Sundar Singh. And he had a deep inclination towards spiritual things because his mother was deeply religious and very, very spiritual. And to learn English, his mother sent him to Ewing Christian High School. But at the age of 14, unfortunately, his mother passed away. which led him into a period of confusion, violence, and despair. He turned against Christianity and burned the Bible page by page while his friends watched. However, a few days later, he had a powerful vision of Jesus Christ that transformed him. He was so confused, he was so tormented that he said he will commit suicide that morning because a train passed by his house early in the morning at 5. He got up at 3 in the morning, did all the preparations he could, and he was about to jump on the rail tracks. And that morning he said, God, if you are real, reveal yourself to me. And there at 4 in the morning, he had the vision of Jesus. And that completely transformed his life. He found purpose and calling to his life. And what did he do when he accepted Christ? His father was outraged. They ostracized him. The community completely ostracized him. His own brother tried to poison him to death. Nonetheless, he continued his spiritual journey, traveling around India and beyond, spreading the message of Christianity in his unique way. Singh blended the Sikh Christian traditions to connect him to Indian communities. He wore the saffron turban and the saffron robe, reinventing himself and calling himself a sadhu. Despite fear opposition from his family to return to his ancestral faith, Sundar refused to budge, and he was baptized in 1905. And he said himself, when he was rejected by his own family, by his own community, he says, I am not worthy to follow in the steps of my Lord, but like him, I want no home, no possessions. Like him, I will belong to the road, sharing the suffering of my people, eating with those who will give me shelter, and telling all the people of the love of God. Sundar's unwavering faith and commitment to his new religion remains an inspiration to many even today. Sadhu Sundar Singh traveled extensively in India and visited Tibet, Malaysia, Japan, China, Sri Lanka, Europe, and the Middle East and America. It is said that he had a gift for preaching that drew hundreds of people wherever he spoke. As a Christian sadhu, he lived on charity and abandoned his possessions, desiring only to follow Jesus' example and win his enemies by love. He was persecuted severely. He was slapped, he was tortured, but he never retaliated. If you see the movie, you will see when he went to Tibet, he was caught and he was thrown into a dry well where they kept dead bodies and dry bones. He was locked up for 3 days, and the key to that well only the head lama had. And mysteriously one night that well was opened and he was taken out, to the surprise of the lama, and they were very fearful as to who is this man. Who is this man? And he's called the mystic sadhu. There were many, many mystic experiences, and he's written many books. If you get your hands on him, not only his autobiography, but many other books that he's written, if you read them, you will be inspired of the faith and the devotion that he had and how God changed and transformed his life. And he journeyed on the rugged and snowy mountain, the paths of Tibet, and he was seen going up to the Himalayas because his heart was to be a mystic, a sadhu. And he was last seen in 1929, and then he disappeared on his way to Tibet. And there's a small connection to this story, and it's very heartwarming because my grandfather, when my father was born, in my granny's place, as we in India do, the mother goes to her mother's place. So after birth, my grandfather had gone to his wife's house to bring her back home. And my father was just 7 days old, and he was in a bag, and they were walking back to the village. This is up in Kumaon Hills, and the road is towards Tibet, towards this border. And my father used to tell us that when they were coming back, they met a sadhu. My grandfather, who was an illiterate, who did not know how to read, he was a trader in horses, and my grandmother were coming. And the sadhu stopped them, and he gave a tract to my grandfather. And he asked, what is in this bag? And my grandfather said, my son, who was 7 days old. And he said, name him Swami Sundar Singh. And he gave him that track. My grandfather came home, a person who did not know how to read or write, started reading that tract. And when he got his hands on the Bible, he read as a literate person. And it was amazing, my father tells me. You would give him any other thing he could not read, but the Bible he read from cover to cover. And he was ostracized. They were taken out from the community. And the entire family, how one by one they came to the Lord, just because of that simple tract that sadhu had given. My father's life was transformed. He became a pioneer in that region. His heart was for the children there who had no education. And he brought home the orphans, the destitutes from the hills, and started a home when I was born. And we have grown up with them. More than 200 children have gone out from our home. And we have seen lives transformed. One life obedient to the call transformed many lives. That is what God calls us for. God can use you and me too. As we reflect on these inspiring lives, let us remember the loving and the missional heart of God is not for a select few. It is not limited to a select few. God can use you and me, regardless of our backgrounds or professions. You do not need to be a pastor or a theological graduate to be a missionary. God has called each one of us here to be a co-laborer in the mission that He has for this world. Each of us has unique gifts and opportunities to share God's love in our communities. No matter what we do, if we know Christ, Christ in us is the hope of glory that shines forth. Christ in me is the hope of glory. No matter what I do, He will transform, because the harvest is His. He is asking us, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into His field. Therefore, we will read that passage again. It says, Matthew 9:35-38. If you have your Bibles, let's read it again. As we've journeyed through these 5 lives, there are many more that you can go through. It says, and Jesus went out throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When He saw the crowds, He had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like a sheep without a shepherd. Then He said to His disciples, can we all read this together? The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. What is our purpose? What is the purpose of the body of Christ? If it is not missions, then what is it? This is the heart of God. He is calling each one of us to co-labor with Him. What are we to do? I encourage you to seek God's calling in your life. Don't think what you're doing is not important. Whether you're studying, whether you're a housewife, whether you're just praying, that is a calling. If you know Christ, you are called. The calling is on your life. What is He asking you to do? How can you serve those around you? Let us pray that God makes His calling clear to you, opening your eyes to the needs of the community and the ways that we can respond. Because God is not just concerned about, He is concerned about souls, but He's also concerned about the holistic lives of individuals that are there. Once they receive Christ, what are they to do now? And we are the ones to be that salt and light for them. Let us be inspired by these lives of William Carey, Pandita Ramabai, Sadhu Sundar Singh, Reverend Narayan Vaman Tilak, These lives remind us of the great loving heart. The missional heart of God is alive and even active today. We need to respond to his call with courage and compassion and a heart for commitment to transformation. Together, we must carry on the legacy of faith and love, knowing that God can and will use us for his glorious purpose. And if some of you sitting here today think my mission on earth is over, do you think your mission is over? Can you feel your pulse? Can you feel your pulse? If you feel your pulse, you're alive. That means there is still a mission. There is still a call on your life. That is what Rick Warren says. Your purpose is still not complete. And if the answer is yes, your mission is not complete. Your pulse is still beating, and it must beat with the heartbeat of God. You must hear what God has on his heart. Let it reverberate with the same pulse. And there is still something more for us to do. And therefore, we can choose to do. Therefore, we can choose to respond to God's heartbeat in 4 different ways. We can be like Moses, who responded and said, when God calls us, and Moses said, who, me? Or like Jonah, not me, Lord. Or like Jeremiah, why me? Or we can simply say like Isaiah, here I am, Lord, send me. The harvest is plentiful. The laborers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest. The Lord of the harvest is here today. And he's asking us, are we ready? Are we ready to respond to his call and say, Lord, send me? Let those who know tell those who don't.